The Dry Man by Wheeler and Tabanez. Until his mid-20s, the one who was to become known as the Dry Man hadn't had much experience with body lotion, lip moisturizer, or any other beauty products. For many years, his only toiletries consisted of a bar of soap, a can of shaving cream, and a disposable razor. He kept his hair clipped short, didn't wear jewelry, and always dressed in muted tones. Perhaps it was this simplicity and lack of attention to his personal appearance that kept him single for so long. When he finally did manage to attract a member of the opposite sex, it was she who turned him on to the pleasures and benefits of well-hydrated skin. At first, he did benefit. His skin had never felt so sleek and alive as when he slathered his entire body in cocoa butter. After toweling off from his nightly shower, he would rub himself with lotion and not need another application for at least 24 hours. When he leaned back on his computer chair at work, his back didn't itch anymore. And when he removed his dress shoes at the end of the day, there were no longer a snowbank of skin flakes covering his socks. He began applying lip balm throughout the day as well, and it had never felt so smooth or natural, just to simply smile. His girlfriend noticed these changes and began to enjoy his touch, which was no longer papery and dry. True, his newfound hygiene wasn't enough to keep her exclusive. After all, she was young and free. But what he learned from her had helped him to be more comfortable in his own skin, and for that he was grateful. She couldn't offer him a committed relationship, but she had given him the gift of hydration, so he didn't begrudge her when she inevitably moved on. Over the years, there were a few hopeful starts with various other ladies, but none of these trysts amounted to much of anything, and he eventually resigned himself to being alone. By his mid-30s, the Dry Man had acclimated fairly well to a solo lifestyle, but all the while he was progressively increasing his moisturizing habits to an unhealthy degree. He lived alone in a small apartment with no pets. He kept his refrigerator sparsely stocked with TV dinners and other prepackaged, simple-to-prepare meals. He awoke on time every day from an untroubled sleep, slathered on his ritualistic cocoa butter, applied his lip balm, dressed in conservative suits, and put in 8 hours at his cubicle. In the evening, he would come home from work, prepare himself a quick meal, take a shower, towel off, and then apply a liberal amount of cocoa butter to his entire body. From head to toe, he would work the lotion into his skin until all of it had absorbed, and then he would swab several layers of balm onto his lips and the areas around his mouth. Once properly hydrated, he could finally relax, but before sitting down to watch his shows, his ritual demanded that he take the time to set up what he called his hydration station. This moisturizing tableau consisted of a 1-liter bottle of orange-flavored seltzer, a tube of raspberry lip balm, and 32-ounce container of cocoa butter. From the seltzer, he would take frequent sips, and whenever his skin felt dry, he would pour a dollop of lotion onto his hands to properly lubricate. In the early years of this routine, he had only modestly moisturized, but over time, he had progressed to the point where he was applying the lip balm after every sip of seltzer and lubing his hands with cocoa butter every 5 minutes or so. Maybe if he had found a partner, there would have been someone to caution him from indulging so freely in this hydration obsession. But love wasn't in the stars for the Dry Man, and his nights remained his own. One would think that after so many applications of cocoa butter, his skin would be left feeling oily and wet, but the actual results were quite to the contrary. It seemed the more lotion and lip balm he applied, the faster his thirsty skin would drink it up. It got to the point where he carried lotion with him everywhere he went, including work. Throughout the day, he would take several bathroom breaks, locking himself into a stall and smearing cocoa butter on his back, trying to cover as much skin as he could without removing his shirt and tie. These eccentricities did not go unnoticed by his fellow employees, who always whispered amongst themselves whenever they saw him taking a lotion bottle into the bathroom. Eventually, his co-workers came to accept these daily forays to the bathroom and ended up tolerating them for years, even as their frequency increased. Early on, the matter had been investigated, and it was deduced that he was in fact only applying lotion to his body and not doing anything nefarious or sexual. This deduction was accomplished by a small troop of giggling male office workers who were sent in as spies to ascertain exactly what was happening in the bathroom. By taking turns peeking through the gaps in the stall, they were able to catch glimpses of the dry man struggling to reach up under his shirt in order to cover every inch of his back with cocoa butter. Then they saw him pull up his pant legs as high as they would go so he could rub lotion over his calf muscles and hydrate behind his knees. They reported their findings to the rest of the office, confirming that he was only rubbing lotion on his skin and not doing anything sexual, prompting one woman to say, "His skin must be exceptionally dry if he needs to use that much lotion. We should call him the Dry Man." Of course, the name stuck. The Dry Man's hydration obsession was beginning to cause minor disturbances in his life, but despite his ever-increasing trips to the lavatory, he was still able to get his work done in a timely fashion, so his co-workers allowed themselves to get used to his eccentricities. In the parlance of addiction, his life was still manageable, but as you can guess, this perilous equilibrium between hydration and sanity was quickly tipping towards uncontrollable lubrication. In his 39th year, his need for hydration finally cost him his job. He had been taking lotion breaks a little too often lately, and when he was discovered fully disrobed in the bathroom stall at his lunch hour, applying cocoa butter to every part of his body, it was simply too much for management to forgive. His actions, having finally been brought to light, the Dry Man was forced to explain to his supervisors that his act was not one of sexual perversion, but an unfortunate case of an extremely dry epidermis that required almost constant hydration. He begged his bosses not to terminate him and tried to make them understand that if this hydration was not applied on an hourly basis, it would cause him to practically writhe in his own skin. His bosses were not appeased by this information, and he was promptly fired, without severance pay. He left that day a broken man, realizing that he had a serious problem and wondering what he was going to do to support himself. On the way home, still shaking from the confrontation, these anxieties led him to do something he had never done before: stop in at a liquor store and buy himself a bottle of strong drink. He wasn't sure what kind to get, and he eventually settled on a pint of vodka because it was clear and didn't look as menacing as the brown liquors. He wasn't much of a drinker, perhaps taking a glass of wine on special occasions or enjoying a microbrew at the company holiday party, but tonight he was feeling down and needed something strong. Before going back to his apartment, he also turned in at the drugstore and bought 2 fresh bottles of cocoa butter, along with 2 tubes of raspberry lip balm. This exchange drew smirks from the teenagers behind the counter, who were familiar with his purchases and assumed he was using the lotion for other purposes besides hydration. Locking the door to his apartment, the man could feel his itching, flaking skin, which hadn't been freshly lotioned since being caught several hours ago in the bathroom at work. The safe period between applications of cocoa butter had long since elapsed, and he was frantic to rehydrate. Ripping off his suit and throwing the crumpled dress shirt into a pile on the otherwise neat floor, the Dry Man cracked open one of the cocoa butter bottles, unscrewed the pump top, and dumped a quarter of the contents directly on his head. He then took his hands and began rubbing the sloppy beige lotion onto his entire expanse of skin, luxuriating in the healing hydration as his flaking crust was appeased with its necessary chemicals. His body was so dry from the time between applications that he was forced to slosh more of the cocoa butter out onto his hands so he could continuously apply it to his back, struggling to rub lotion into every pore. Having performed this lubrication ritual to excess, and after numerous applications of raspberry lip balm, the Dry Man finally began to feel like himself again. As he stood naked in the middle of his small apartment, he closed his eyes, then searched his entire body with his mind's eye, seeking any dry spots he might have missed. Finding none, he opened his eyes and began putting on his pajamas. Once he was dressed and comfortable, he lined up his seltzer, the now half-empty cocoa butter container, and the bottle of vodka he had purchased. Clicking on the TV, he turned the volume low so he could just barely hear it, and then set about applying another coat of lotion to his hands and face, which had partially dried out while he was settling in. Feeling hydrated again, he sat back on his couch and reached for the vodka bottle. Cracking the seal on the plastic cap, he tentatively smelled the liquid inside. It reeked of medical disinfectant, and he tried to think back, wondering if he had ever tried this type of alcohol before. Taking a sip from the pint bottle, he almost regurgitated at the strength of the vodka, but managed to choke it down. The liquid fire burned through his hydration, prompting him to uncap his lip balm and apply it liberally around his mouth to combat the heat from the alcohol. "Yuck!" he bitterly exclaimed, setting the bottle down and reaching for the cocoa butter. After applying another coat of lotion on his hands, lower back, and elbows, he began thinking about the job he had lost today. Most people finding themselves newly unemployed would be scared to lose their house, their car, or the clothes off their back, but not the dry man. He voiced his fears aloud to the TV. "What if I can't afford cocoa butter? My God, I'll dry out if that happens." With these thoughts, he turned again to the bottle. The slight sip he had taken was warming him from the inside, and although it had been unpleasant to choke down, he needed escape so badly that he was willing to overcome his dislike of alcohol, just for the oblivion he knew it could offer. In one crazy swipe, he took the pint bottle off the table, unscrewed the cap, and poured the contents down his throat. It didn't burn as bad when chugging it like this, so he didn't stop until the entire bottle was empty. Then it did burn, and badly. But within a matter of minutes, he was too insensible to register the fire in his belly. Never in his life had the dry man taken in this much alcohol, and it caused him to pass out, his tongue lolling out of his mouth as he slumped over on the couch. 15 minutes later, in a state of extremely groggy drunkenness, he was awakened from his stupor by the incessant needling of the telephone ringing on its cradle by the side of the couch. His coordination was failing him, but out of habit, he reached for the phone, knocking it off the hook by way of answering it. It took some time for his fumbling, drunken hands to find the receiver, but once he got it to his ear, he managed to greet the other person on the line without slurring. "Hello? Hi, this is Sharon from the office. How are you? I just wanted to say that I'm so sorry you got fired today. How are you holding up?" Sharon was a middle-aged, divorced mother of two who sat across the room from his cubicle. She was one of the few people in the office who didn't refer to him as the dry man. She had been watching him for almost 2 years, thinking he was eccentric and weird, but kind of cute in a plain, harmless sort of way. With the encouragement of her non-work friends, she had been recently building up her courage to talk to him on a more intimate level, but had waited too long and was now reaching out by telephone as a last resort. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I feel really bad about what happened to you." The dry man, who was usually so tongue-tied around women, and who had all but given up on love, suddenly perked up from his drunkenness and sat up on the couch. Switching the phone to speaker mode so he could apply more cocoa butter to his hands and body, he began a rambling explanation of why he had to use lotion on his skin at least every hour. By talking very fast, he found that he could keep his slurring to a minimum, and as the conversation progressed, he was reasonably sure that Sharon had no idea that he had just guzzled a pint of vodka or had been drinking at all. On the other end of the phone, Sharon was taking in this explanation of why he had to apply so much lotion with a quiet acceptance. She was fully aware of the reason why he had been fired, as was everyone in the office, and she was well acquainted with the dry man's frequent bathroom breaks. It was hard not to notice when he would return from the lavatory smelling strongly of drugstore fragrances and have unabsorbed lotion streaks in his hair, with cocoa butter stains spotting his suit. Sharon was a compassionate woman who had some slight OCD issues of her own, so she was able to empathize and look past the dry man's strange proclivities. After hearing his chaotic, explosive explanation, which she naively attributed to emotion rather than alcohol, she sympathized even further with the dry man and asked him if he would like to come over to her house for a nice home-cooked meal. "Also, you can bring all the cocoa butter you need if it will make you more comfortable. I have some brand-name skin lotion here if you need it, but something tells me I probably don't have enough to keep you happy."